Codeword doesn't want to take 30 seconds away from the podcast you love. We're fans of 404 Media too. Hell, we're even throwing a party together. So here's 20 seconds back. Love your favorite tech marketing agency, Codeword. Find us at codeword.agency.
Hello. That was my Joseph Cox impression. Hello.
Keep it in.
And welcome to the 404 Media Podcast. Emmanuel Mayberg and I are filling in for our colleagues, Joseph Cox, who is still away from keyboard, and Jason Kepler, who is stricken very suddenly with COVID. May he rest in peace. Just kidding. Jason's fine, but he is not here today. It's just Emmanuel and I. This is the 404 Media Podcast. As I said, we're going to go through some of our stories that we have looked into in the last week and a half. Emmanuel, hey, how's it going?
I'm great. I want to be honest. We're down bad. We've been down bad for a couple of weeks now. We had travel, we had vacation, and
you were sick.
I was sick. I had COVID, and everybody laughed at me. Ha ha ha! Emmanuel finally got COVID after 4 years, but then Jason got COVID as well, and I'm sure you'll all get COVID soon, you bastards. Thank you for bearing with us. We'll be back in full formation, hopefully next week. And until then, you're stuck with me and Sam. And we're going to start by talking about Sam's story, which has the headline, NaNoWriMo says condemning AI is classist and ableist. Sam, let's start with, what is NaNoWriMo, and do you think I'm pronouncing that correctly?
In my head, I've never said this word out loud, as we do many of the words on this podcast, but I say it in my head as NaNoWriMo, but maybe that's wrong. Who cares? But yeah, so NaNoWriMo is, I learned just through writing the story that it's been around since the 90s. I thought it was a more recent thing than that, but it started as just like a little writing challenge. Started in San Francisco as like a local writing group challenge to write a 50,000 word manuscript, which is like a book length, in 1 month. And usually that month, or I guess always that month, has been November. And then in 2005, NaNoWriMo became its own nonprofit organization. So it formed into something bigger than just a casual challenge. And nowadays it's, it has a writing board, it takes donations, runs fundraising campaigns. So it's this kind of this beast of a thing now.
I would say it's basically, the idea is, a lot of people have ideas for novels, but then it's like, when am I going to start this thing? How am I going to get through the hump of writing the first page of like a 50,000 word novel? And this is kind of like a trick to get people to get started. Like, that's what I've heard from a lot of people who did it, is like, maybe you don't finish, maybe you don't do it the whole month, maybe you don't hit the goal, but it's like, if you participate, by the end of it, you have like a good start on a novel and an excuse to start it. This is a bit of a tangent, but have you ever considered doing this? Have you ever thought about doing this?
I feel like for a while, like when I was probably in my teens and 20s, every year I would be like, oh, I should try that, because it's like, it's the peer influence. Yeah. It's like you have like accountability basically to write
Accountability buddies.
So every year I was like, oh, I should try to do that, and then never ever did. And then I did write a book, and it took way longer than 1 month.
How long is your book? How many words is your book?
I filed it at 100,000, and I think they made me cut it to like 70.
I see. Yeah, I can't imagine doing 50K in a month.
No.
I've considered doing it. I've thought about doing it, but also I've been basically paid to write my whole adult life. And I'm like, I don't know, man, I need to get paid to put in this kind of work.
I was thinking like, how much, like maybe we do this every month anyway. I bet we get close.
Oh yeah. But we get paid, right? It's like, that's the thing. It's my job. It's like, I'm not going to do it for fun. Okay. So What happened this weekend? What did this organization announce that made you write this blog?
Yeah, so I guess it was Monday. I logged on. It was the long weekend. It was Labor Day weekend. So I looked at Twitter for the first time in a couple of days, and people were really pissed off about this new post that NaNoWriMo published on their blog that said the title was "What is NaNoWriMo's position on artificial intelligence?" Which, good start. It's going to be good no matter what. And the organizers who wrote the NaNoWriMo organizers who wrote the blog said that NaNoWriMo as an organization does not explicitly support any specific approach to writing, nor does it explicitly condemn any approach, including the use of AI, which pretty tame start. No big deal there. But then it goes on to say that this is a quote, in our belief, the categorical condemnation of artificial intelligence has classist and ableist undertones, and that questions around the use of AI tie to questions around privilege. I could kind of read just from this, but it's also in the blog. It goes on to say, not all brains have the same abilities, and not all writers function at the same level of education or proficiency in the language in which they are writing. Some brains and ability levels require outside help or accommodations to achieve certain goals. And what they're talking about here is basically using ChatGPT or something similar. They don't name ChatGPT or any other LLM or platform or anything, but they're talking about using AI to write your book instead of writing it yourself, and kind of using this disability advocacy speech to justify that position. And obviously people really hated that because among indie publishers and independent creators, AI is seen as this, it's the thing that's destroying their livelihoods.
So let's you see, the reason you see this on Twitter is people got really pissed, right? It's just classic online beef has emerged because of this announcement. And let me try and map out the elements in the beef stew, in my opinion, and you tell me what you think of these various actors. Or I mean, I'm not going to ask you to make a judgment call about what is the right position to have here, but what your read on it is. So it's obviously there is the anti-AI crowd, which over the last couple of years has gone pretty militant about the use of AI for any creative endeavor or any endeavor at all. There's a crowd there's a spectrum, right, and how people feel about it. But the people who are tweeting about it and are getting really mad about it are very staunchly anti-AI, especially in creative endeavors. Then there's the AI apologist slash AI booster crowd, which is hey, this is empowering me. I'm able to make art that I wasn't able to make because of these tools. That's great. And then I would say the Joker element in here is the trend that is not limited just to this controversy, but maybe weaponization is not the right word, but I'm going to go with it. But the weaponization of language around ableism and privilege, right? So that is kind of that's a lot going on in the beef stew here. What do you think? Where have we netted out? Are people still mad? Or is there a truce? What's going on?
I think people are still mad. I think a lot of people have been mad at NaNoWriMo for various reasons over the years that we're not going to get into today. But there are people who are skeptical of the community who are still in it. And they're definitely still mad. I think it's just I don't know. I mean, you exactly mapped it out correctly that there are these various things coming together that have created just the perfect storm for a Twitter panic. But underlying this is the idea that AI is being able to be creative is some kind of right, or that having ideas alone is in itself enough to be an author, or a writer, or an artist. Having like the right to be able to produce whatever you want by whatever means. And we see this playing out in court, right? So like, in the last couple of years, it's like all pretty famous authors who, wouldn't just like sue companies for the fuck of it are getting into this fray. So it's not just like, oh, people are mad on Twitter. It's like people whose money is on the line are actually also pretty pissed off about AI. There was a group of writers last year that sued OpenAI, which runs ChatGPT, but they're seeking class action status with the claim that ChatGPT is copying their works without their permission, because it's ingesting all of these books that they've written without permission. And then just last month, so August, a group of news outlets filed a lawsuit against OpenAI, claiming that the company was using their copyrighted news articles without permission or payment. So it's like the stance that NaNoWriMo is taking, forcefully behind AI is just so interesting. And to me, it's such a forced own goal. It's like, why would you do that? Why would you even come out and say something, not just say, we welcome the use of AI in this challenge, but if you don't, you're classist and ableist. It's so spicy to say that. I don't know why you would.
It's like, I personally, just to put my cards on the table, I don't like the stated position that they put out there, like many of the authors who got mad. I just think it's a really wild position to have on AI. But even like giving them benefit of the doubt and accepting that argument, this seems like the worst venue possible to make this argument, because there's an element to this whole organization and writing a novel in a month, which is almost like an endurance and athleticism aspect of writing, where it's just like, we're going to write a gigantic number of words in 1 month.
Yeah.
And that is why this whole organization exists. And it's a bit stunty, right? It's like almost like, oh, forget about the quality. It's just like, are you able to produce 50,000 words of prose in 1 month? And it would be as if, like, we're having a marathon and I'm showing up in a car and I win the marathon. And then I'm like, it's ableist to say that I'm not able to participate in this marathon in my car while everyone else has to run.
Yeah.
It's just a wild venue to make that argument, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's like the point of it is the effort of it. And they're saying, well, you don't really need to do the effort if you don't want to, or you're not able to.
You can literally, with LLMs, produce 50,000 word novels basically as fast as you can write a prompt or click a mouse or whatever. It's kind of, just a really bad place to make this argument. So, do you want to talk about some of the specific famous authors, or the one that you kind of like mentioned in the story that was part of the organization?
Yeah. So Daniel Jose Older, who has written some of the Star Wars canon and has written a bunch of like fantasy series and things like that, is pretty prolific. He tweeted that he's stepping down from the writers board for NaNoWriMo because of this whole debacle. Maureen Johnson, who's also a best-selling YA novelist, also tweeted that she's stepping down from the writers board of the Young Writers Program, and said, I want nothing to do with the organization from this point forward. Very forceful statements from some of these authors. Adam Christopher, who is also an author, came out and said, NaNoWriMo is anti-writing, anti-art, anti-creativity, anti-craft, which again, pretty forceful. And it's just like a lot of these people are saying we're stepping down, and we encourage you to also basically boycott this organization because we're so against what they've come out and said. And it's interesting because last year they actually kind of soft launched, NaNoWriMo soft launched the idea of being pro AI. They wrote in a blog post that was very short, but it was basically like, use whatever you want, including AI. And then they did like a gimmicky, like, here's a ChatGPT response to the idea that you should use, AI in your writing. And they left it at that. And people didn't really, like, most people didn't really notice. Definitely not as many people got so upset about it last year. But it's this particular statement that people really reacted to and that took off the way that it did. And I've had a couple people email me and message me and say, you also should mention that the sponsors or some of the sponsors in this this year's challenge are AI companies, which is definitely interesting. Definitely adds a new twist to this. Pro Writing Aid, which is it's like an AI powered tool suite for writing, like grammar checking and things like that, and writing, like quote unquote writing assistance, which is text generation. You're adding like details and dialogue and things like that through this tool. So yeah, people are kind of like, well, they're taking money from AI companies. So of course they're pro AI and against anyone who criticizes them for using AI, which I thought, that's a good point. I don't know. I don't know enough about these companies to really dig into what they are specifically about, or what NaNoWriMo is doing with that data, but
Yeah, I think one of the sponsors is Scrivener, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a very popular tool for scriptwriters and authors. Did you use it? I know Joe used it.
I tried. I was like, no, this is too much.
Yeah. But it's like, there are many tools that people can use when they work on a long project. Like sometimes Google Docs is not enough. Mm-hmm. And I get that. And I'm sure that some of them have AI elements to some degree, but sorry, I forgot the name, but the one you mentioned.
Oh, Pro Writing Aid.
Yeah, that one, like I was looking at its site and it explicitly promotes like AI as part of its brand. So understandably, people latched onto that and it got really mad. Another tangent, and we don't have to get into it, but another reason this is a really terrible venue, you mentioned YA. I assume that a lot of the people who participate in this are into YA or are aspiring YA authors, and by definition are like early career authors. Mm-hmm. And I noticed because my wife is a big reader, and also, not to brag, but she's a book critic for the New York Times. And it's like, as a fandom, as an audience, it is the most vicious audience that I can think of. Like, people talk about gamers and how mad gamers can get. It's like, do not fuck with like the YA readership. So it's like that is in the mix here as well, and another thing that makes it a really
they're very protective of their own fandom, and very vocal and very mobilized when they don't like something.
Yeah, I assume that like some of these writers are like, they hold their positions earnestly, but also I think there's probably a pressure to distance yourself from this or anything AI, because you don't want to be associated with that, given your readers and the people who support your work.
Yeah.
So where has NaNoWriMo left us off? What is the latest?
I mean, I assume they saw the extreme explosion that they created. And they put out or they updated the original post and added some phrasing to it. I wonder if they wrote it or if AI wrote it. But the edition says, "We are troubled by situational abuse of AI, and that certain situational abuse clearly conflicts with our values. We want to make it clear that AI is a large umbrella technology, and that the size and complexity of that category, which includes both non-generative and generative AI, among other uses, contributes to our belief that it is simply too big to categorically endorse or not endorse." I don't know. They're trying to have it both ways, which never ever works. And they're not even doing it in like a nuance. That's not even like adding nuance. That's just kind of like, well, it's sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's good, you know, but we're going to stand by our statement that if you say it's bad, you're ableist and classist.
Yeah. Closing thoughts, books, not even once. That's what I have to say.
Blogs only.
Blogs only, right. You can collect your blogs and publish them as a book later if you want.
Yeah.
Otherwise, no thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, let's leave that there and go to break. And when we come back, we'll talk about something much better than books, which is Doom. So we'll be right back.
Okay, we're back with a story by Emmanuel, and the headline is "This is Doom running on a diffusion model." I love to see Doom running on weird shit. Doom runs on our very website. If you can find it, it's a little Easter egg. So I guess I see a lot of like this, like Doom running on blank has become a meme. It's like Doom running on your fridge, Doom running on your Roomba, which are things that Doom has run on. But putting Doom on things has become its own genre / joke. So yeah, I saw this and I was kind of like, oh, okay, Doom running on something else, great. But it actually is way more interesting than that, and it has some interesting implications within gaming itself. So yeah, Emmanuel, do you want to explain like what is game engine? Game letter N, GEN.
But pronounced like you said, pronounced
Game engine. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are a lot of generative AI products and gimmicks and papers. I would say way more than we can track. If you're keeping an eye on like preprint papers, which I do, there are dozens and dozens a day. But this one went really viral. So we wanted to cover it also. And what it is basically is a group of researchers from Google and DeepMind, which is Google's AI outfit, and some researchers at Tel Aviv University, which I believe has some overlap with these Google researchers. They put out this paper where they present this software called Game Engine. And basically, what they did is they trained a stable diffusion model. Stable diffusion is an open weights AI model that we have covered a lot, primarily because it's open weights, people can tweak it and make it generate different kinds of images. Sam, you and I are obviously very interested in that because people mostly use that to generate non-consensual images. But in this case, the researchers trained the model on a bunch of Doom gameplay. And what Game Engine does is, based on the frames that come before and based on a player's input, it predicts the next frame. It is probably more complicated than that if you get into the weeds. But to simplify that even further, what is basically happening is Doom is a game that runs on a traditional game engine. I believe it's called id Tech, maybe is like what the branding was for the engines back then. And this is not running on that. It's trained on that, but it is running entirely on the stable diffusion model. It's not going through the game engine. It's just like looking at the frames that came before and then looking at the player input and saying, based on that statistically, which is what AI is basically, it's always statistically producing the next word or frame or pixel that most matches the prompt or that it thinks would most match what you want, which is a pretty wild development. It is very far from being a practical product, and we can like talk about that more later. But it is a proof of concept, and the proof of concept is essentially like maybe in the future we're in a place where we don't need game developers to build game engines, which are these huge investment, like hugely complicated tasks that game developers need to accomplish before they develop and ship a game. They're just going to be able to kind of use generative AI in the same way that we produce images and video and text, and kind of uh, generate video games from these AI models entirely.
Yeah. So, I mean, why is Doom just simple enough to make this work? Because like the original Doom it's a pretty simple game. You know, it's a maze with monsters in it. Is that why they chose Doom, or did they choose it for the memeability? Like, what's the reasoning behind that?
First of all, how dare you? Doom is a beautiful work of art.
I'm not denying that.
To answer your question, they definitely understand. Like, they did it for the reason that you said, right? It's just like it's a very the virality of the study has proven their point.
Yeah.
Like, the joke is, and I mean, let's get into it for a second. It's when id made Doom, John Carmack, who is actually working on AGI right now, but he made the Doom engine, and he kind of ideologically believes that stuff should be open source. That was kind of the scene back then in the 90s for shareware and stuff. A lot of their early work was based on like tweaking other existing work. So he really, believe that Doom should be open source, and it is. And that is why people are able to run it on everything. Like, that is why the joke exists, is because people can tweak in the code and like put it on anything and modify it so it can run on like a smart toothbrush or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's why they did it. But I don't think they would have been able to do it with like, I don't know, whatever. This is how little I keep up with video games at the moment. I can't even think of like what is the hottest new video game. I'm playing Horizon, right? So it wouldn't be able to do it with Horizon, I think, because like the visual complexity and the density of details would be like really hard for the model to predict the next frames in. So it's like, it's a meme, it's visually simplistic, and the input are simplistic as well, right? It's like Doom is a 3D game, but you're kind of moving on one plane. You're not like looking around and down and moving in and out of objects like modern games do today. So it's easy to replicate through a diffusion model for that reason. Also, I would note is a lot of the visuals are kind of static, right? So it's like the level is pretty static. A lot of the 2D textures on the walls and the doors and stuff is pretty static. The diffusion model runs at, I think it's 20 frames per second, which is very bad for an old game. But it's functional. And when you see video of it, all those static elements of the game are recreated pretty well. Where there is a lot of animation and like fast changes in animation, which is when you would like shoot an enemy and the enemy reacts to that. That's where you start to see like the AI quote unquote hallucination stuff pop in, which is just like you see some visual deformities. And I think that's probably because, I don't know, the level of detail and change that happens there is kind of difficult for the model to like train on properly and recreate properly. But yeah, it's a meme, and it's simple enough for a diffusion model to handle, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed in the video, like watching the video, the demo that they published, you don't see a lot of demons on purpose. You know, it's like I'm sure they left a lot of those out because they don't look that good when you're generating them in real time. I also wonder, like, I mean, this kind of feels like an iteration of what we saw with No Man's Sky, where that was like the procedural generation, but maybe this is a totally different level of like using AI in video games. But, that was what, like 2015, 2016.
2016, I
So
think.
yeah, so we weren't really talking about like AI replacing devs at that point. It was
That's
more of a novelty.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up. I didn't think of it, but because like we said, people are very mad about AI and its various forms, across any medium, right? But people obviously use AI in video games all the time, whether it's like enemy behavior or procedural generation is really, I would say, like the most common and used, you know, application of it. But it's probably it's different, right? Because it's like what you're doing is like you're procedurally generating a world, and that is created, and then you play through it. But all the assets and art and design, that stuff is human made. So I don't know. Maybe it's just because people got used to it, but people don't get mad about that, obviously, or at least not for these ethical, creative, and copyright reasons.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Yeah. Any last thoughts on Doom guy, demons, etc.?
I think. I mean, okay. So one reason I wanted to write the story is that a few months ago, the CEO of NVIDIA was at a conference. He's giving a lot of talks right now because everybody wants to know how he created one of the most successful companies ever. But somebody asked him if he thinks that we're headed to a future where every pixel, no matter where you see it, is AI generated. And he basically said yes. And a few months ago, when he said that, that seemed really outlandish. Like the idea that we would AI generate video games instead of using traditional video game engines. It just seems really, really wild. And to be clear, like this is not a peer-reviewed study yet. It has no impact on the way video games are being made right now. It's like very speculative, very experimental. It doesn't mean that anything is changing right now in the way that video games are being made, but it is a proof of concept. It is really impressive, and I some people got mad at the story because they didn't think I sufficiently um, dunked on like all the limitations that are obvious in this proof of concept, and that's fair. And I mean, I thought I was pretty clear on it, but maybe I should have done a better job to like outline like all the possible issues with this. But I think it's important to kind of track these uh, proof of concept papers, um, and take them seriously, because in the past 2 years we've seen how a lot of the flaws with AI, um, that people use to dismiss it are like fixed pretty quickly. The thing that I keep coming back to is I feel like in 2022, when we were seeing a lot of AI images online and social media, people were really making fun of the hands and how they were all mangled and people had like 12 fingers. And the meme was like, oh, I'm sure that this will replace all visual artists any minute now. And then they would, show AI generated hands being completely mangled. And that was totally a meme. And you can still see those deformities in a lot of AI generation, but that is basically a solved problem, in my opinion. Like, if you're really trying to AI generate hands and you do the proper training and use the latest technology, it's just like you're going to get realistic looking hands. Like, problems like this can be solved. So, something that is a proof of concept one day could become very practical just a few months from now. And I wouldn't dismiss a lot of these generative AI developments based on the limitations that we're seeing currently. Does it mean that like game engines are a thing of the past? Definitely not right now. I'm very skeptical, but again, I just think it's important to track these things because they move pretty fast, and it's kind of shocking how fast all of the problems can be solved. That doesn't solve the ethical problems. It doesn't solve the labor problems, all the problems that we report on to no end with training data and so on. But if this is something you're worried about, you gotta keep an eye on it.
Yeah. I, for one, can't believe that people got mad at you for not addressing every single possible theoretical angle in one 600-word blog post. That's just crazy to me. But yeah, it's also crazy that these things are moving so incredibly fast that they're hard to keep up with, but we try. Okay, we're gonna, I think, wrap the pod there. If you're a subscriber, stick around. And we're going to talk about a story Emmanuel wrote about face swap apps and the Apple Store. And otherwise, we will see you next week, hopefully with the full cast here next time.